Interesting topics to kick off your weekend. Looking at the news with an eye of faith. This is Friendly Fire with Stu Kerns on the voice of Lincoln, 1400 KLIN.
Good Saturday morning. Glad to have you along. It's Friendly Fire here on 1400 KLIN. Stu Kerns is my name, and I'm your host. We've so glad to have Dan Alberts here last week to sub in. I was at a conference in Rochester, Minnesota. Rochester, Minnesota is where everybody wants to go in February. It is just a delight. The air temperature as we left was -5 degrees. That was the sunny daytime air. And that is not like wind chill. That's just air temperature. But thankfully the conference was inside, so it was a good time. And good to be back. So glad that Dan could have a special Valentine's Day edition. If you want to follow what we're doing on Friendly Fire, always know you can go to the KLIN.com page, and there's some information there as well as previous podcasts. And you can go to this crazy place called Facebook, and it's a very complicated name. It's called Friendly Fire on KLIN. So, Friendly Fire on KLIN Facebook. Like the page, and you'll be up to date on what's happening there. It is great to have in the studio this morning another pastor that I've actually known on Facebook longer than I've known in person, but it's great to have Aaron Loy with me this morning from Mosaic.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Great. Aaron, how long have you lived in Lincoln?
Well, we moved actually to Minnesota. You're harping on my home turf there.
Oh, man. I love Minnesota, but it is, by golly, it is cold up there.
It's brutal. I know. Yeah. I don't know that I could ever go back for that reason. We moved in 98 from Minnesota, and I've tried to leave Lincoln a couple times. Went back to Minneapolis and L.A. for a while. But, can't stay away. We're back, I think, for good. So
that's nice.
We've been back in Lincoln this last time. It would be 6 years in April.
Lincoln is an addiction that we don't want to get over. That's right. Now, where did you live in L.A.?
We were up in Pasadena.
Oh, okay. I've got a niece there in Pasadena.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And my daughter's out there in West Hollywood. So we kind of keep in touch with the L.A. stuff. But you're back. And how long ago did you start Mosaic then?
Well, we hit the ground running that April 6 years ago, and then we actually a week from tomorrow will celebrate our 5-year birthday as a church since we launched.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it's just taken off great. It's been a very, very effective and magnetic church here in town. What makes Mosaic distinctive? What would you?
People ask me that. We're not doing anything that's crazy innovative as far as our form and structure of church. We're never going to write a book on.
Hey, that's okay. We've had people write books. They kind of tend to flame out. So that's okay.
Yeah. For us, I think if there's anything that makes Mosaic distinctive, is we decided early on that we're going to seek to be more patient with people than anybody else. And so we have a lot of people in our community that have not really crossed that line of faith yet. They're kind of people all over the spiritual spectrum. And we constantly celebrate that we're all on a journey and we're in different places. And that at Mosaic they'll always be embraced for who they are and not for who they are not. And but while we're together, we're going to crack open the scriptures and really take a candid look at who Jesus was and what he claimed and the implications if in fact it's true. And so a lot of people have taken us up on that invitation, and it's been a good journey.
That's great. We often talk about trying to connect with people who are seeking, but it takes a mindset, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. And so that's something all of us, if you're going to do ministry, we've got to learn some patience. I know that for me, I just look back at my own life and how long did it take me to figure some stuff out. Yes. And so to be able to give that back as a gift to someone else, the gift that I received of patience, that's a great thing. That's really neat. Well, Aaron, this first section, we always take just a few minutes to get better acquainted with you, and there's no better way than 7 questions. Right. So we're going to play a little 7 questions here, and we'll start with number 1. What was the faith of your childhood?
Faith of my childhood. Yeah. So I'm a 4th generation pastor.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Nice.
So there's, so my dad is a pastor. My grandpa was a pastor. His dad was a pastor.
Wow.
So growing up, I was a church rat. And being a pastor was one thing I said I would never be.
See, I had a guess about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Pastors' kids are like, either they are hell on two wheels or they're like, astronauts in their spare time. And I was the former, for most of my life. We had some rough experiences and church splits and relocation of our family, that whole thing. And so very early on, I was like, if this is what it's about, I'm out, And, never could fully shake Jesus though. And so I definitely fall in that category of being spiritual but not religious for most of my life.
Yep.
And then basically, down the road, God just kind of hijacked me and I couldn't run forever. And, lo and behold, he called me into the very thing that I spent so much of my life avoiding and helping me to see that some of those things I experienced, probably were never what God intended. And there was never his vision of what the church would be. And so, later in life, I just felt like God was calling me to be a part of trying to create something different rather than be a cynic or a critic on the sidelines.
Yeah. It's interesting, God hijacking your life. In college, people had told me that I ought to be a pastor, and I just said, I want to be a pastor. And so
How do you take that?
Well, I took it as a positive thing that they saw some kind of a quality in me that was whatever. Even the whole idea of being a pastor, it's almost like, is that gender neutral? Just being a pastor. I'm not sure I want that, but I remember very consciously telling God in college, I don't want to be a pastor. So if you want me to be a pastor, you're going to have to make me want to be a pastor. And I dropped it. That was it. I was done. And then a few years later, it was like, all of a sudden I realized, wait, I kind of do want to do this. And okay, God answered the prayer. It took a few years.
Yeah.
But he answered the prayer.
That's good.
All right. Number 2. What's currently on your music playlist?
Oh, currently on my music playlist, I've been listening to a lot of old school Foo Fighters lately.
See, the 80s are lost to me.
Okay.
Is that 80s?
No, well,
90s?
90s, a lot of
90s
great
are really
ones.
lost on me. But
Yeah, Foo Fighters. Well, see, the 90s are my jam.
Okay.
I am like a 90s forever kind of kid.
Go. I'm a 70s forever.
Yeah, right. So, I'm quickly realizing I'm just getting old, man. I'm getting older. You know what I mean? Like, I'm married to that decade.
Right. Yep.
But yeah, a lot of great Foo Fighters music in the 90s and a lot of Radiohead. I've been listening, kind of revisiting Radiohead. And Christopher O'Reilly is a pianist. And he's got 2 albums where he does only Radiohead music, and it's phenomenal.
Wow. Okay, you need to give me 2 songs before you leave today for my run list.
Deal.
I need really peppy songs that will keep me moving.
I've got a couple Foo Fighter ones.
That's what I'm looking for. Number 3. Speaking of music, what was the best concert you ever attended?
Best concert, that one's easy. And this is going to probably date me as well, but U2.
That would be mine too.
I know, right? Exactly. They're incredible that way. But I saw them in Denver at the Pepsi Center just a few months after 9/11.
Yeah, oh boy.
And
oh boy.
Bono. I'd read the book on his faith, and so I was pretty connected and kind of dialed in. But I really had no idea just how deep that faith ran until that night.
Yeah.
And they did an extended experience honoring the victims of 9/11, and he pointed people to Jesus probably 4 times, where he just went on like sermonettes.
Wow.
And it was probably the most spiritual experience I've ever had.
Yeah.
And it might sound, maybe a pastor shouldn't say that, heretical to say.
Well, 2 pastors are going to say it.
Okay, all right.
I went to just whatever, was it 09 or something in Omaha. And I felt like there were 2 very different experiences going on. There was one group that were there was just rocking out and fairly drunk and having a good time, and then the rest of us were like in a worship service.
Yes.
It was amazing.
Did they end singing 40 by chance?
I don't think so, but there was something else that had a theme to it that was right in there. Yeah.
They did a long run of finishing concerts like that, and I'd watched them from like the 80s. And that night in Denver, they finished that way, and we're singing the words of Psalm 40. And same thing is like, I'm totally dialed in, like I'm worshiping right now. I don't know what you're all worshiping, but it was beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. All right, number 4. When friends come to Lincoln, what is the must-see place you always take them?
Oh, well, if it's a Saturday in the fall, I gotta take them to a Husker game.
Thank you. Can we get an amen to that out there? Even if you're listening, you need to say amen right now.
Yeah, the Spirit is moving in this booth.
That's
I don't know if you can feel it.
Oh, I can.
Yes. So I try to do that, got to experience the state religion. But I've got kind of a, if they're coming in town, I've got like a journey I take them on. So like breakfast, we go down to Bread and Cup.
Yep.
For lunch, you got to go to Honest Abe's.
Oh yeah.
For dinner, I've got a new one. I don't know have you been to Piedmont Bistro?
I have not. I need to be there.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Uh-huh.
So that's a new favorite. So
Nice.
dinner, we'll take them there, and then we'll go to the other room for drinks after dinner.
Okay. The other room.
Yes.
Okay, you'll have to tell me more about that as
Yes.
well. Number 5. What's your favorite film?
My favorite film is Good Will Hunting.
Ooh.
Yes.
Well, that's pretty right in the strike zone of the 90s somewhere.
What it totally was. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I love that film. I've been told it's like the men's version of a chick flick. It's like a bromance kind of film.
That's probably true.
Yeah. And I'm locked in.
Yeah.
Call me what you will.
No, that's good. That's good. See, mine, I'm kind of a Rocky guy, which is, I think Rocky is kind of like a man's chick flick.
Yes.
Because there's some depth to it. There really is.
Yeah.
Number, let's see, you're up to 6? Yes, 6. Well, speaking of Hollywood, who should play you in the Hollywood film of your life?
Who should play me? I'm going to go with who I want to play me.
Well, sure.
Maybe, if I get the casting call.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm going to go with a gloriously bearded Mark Wahlberg.
Ooh, Marky Mark.
Yes, the one and only.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he has actually got some acting chops too, as well as being buff.
Yeah. Well, and he's super cool and kind of BA, and I feel like if anybody can make my life look cooler than it is, it's Mark Wahlberg.
Count me in on that. And number 7. Then if you weren't doing ministry today, then what would you be doing?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think I would. I'd still be writing. I love to write. If I was done today, I'd probably go back to school and do a little bit more studying around writing. And but also, I love starting things, and so I think I would be engaged in some kind of entrepreneurial ventures because I love, taking an idea or a vision and seeing it from a spark in somebody's imagination to completion.
Yeah. Well, that's church planting right there.
Exactly.
I mean, that's it's funny. People talk about the different qualities it takes to start a church, and if you're of my age, and I'm in my 50s, people always think, well, I got to be just an outstanding preacher, and not that preaching is okay. Sure, you don't want to be a bad preacher, but actually, the gift mix to start something from scratch is more in the entrepreneurial range. To have that kind of vision,
totally,
and to imagine things that don't exist, and then to find a way to make it happen.
Yes.
So that was an invigorating process.
It was.
Yeah.
It was, and it's terrifying, but that, that's part of the fun, the adrenaline, the risk, the unknowns.
Yep.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, we were talking this morning with Aaron Loy from Mosaic here in Lincoln. If you do want to call in, if you have a question for Aaron, it's 402-479-1400. 402-479-1400. It's a Saturday morning. We're glad to have you along. It's going to be a great day out there. Find a way to get outside. You're listening to Friendly Fire on 1400 KLIN.
Taking a look at the issues of the week with a faith-based perspective. You're listening to Friendly Fire with Stu Kerns on 1400 KLIN.
Good Saturday morning. It is 7:21. Glad to have you along. It's a Friendly Fire morning. Stu Kerns here with Aaron Loy from Mosaic here in town. And a lot of times what we do is connect the news of the week to our faith. And in this case, I was looking, I had noticed that Aaron did a blog post on anxiety and depression. And every time I talk about anxiety and depression with folks, I just get a tremendous response because there are a lot of folks who are suffering and a lot of people who are silently suffering, especially Christians. What motivated you to blog about it, and what made you write? Yeah,
well, being entirely honest, depression has been a part of my journey for as long as I can remember. I can remember growing up in church as a PK and going through extended seasons of struggle, and when you're just kind of in the fog, in the dark. And for the longest time, I didn't really know how to understand that. We didn't talk about mental health issues really at all. And because we didn't really talk about it, there was just a lot of confusion for me. I thought, am I doing this wrong? Is my faith broken? Do I not really know God? Am I not connected? Did the prayer not stick? And some of the music too that you sing just kind of leads you to believe if you're doing it right, you're happy, right? Because real Christians have the joy down in their heart to stay. They didn't have lament versions for the depressed, and so we never talked about it. And the strange thing is, as I've gotten older, even as mental health has come more to the forefront, I've been a part of a lot of different churches and different denominations, and have been in ministry not as long as you have, but for the last 13 years or so. And I don't think I had ever heard in a church I've been a part of it ever addressed from the front. I attended 3 seminaries before finally finishing, and have a couple of degrees in Christian leadership. And I don't remember a class where we addressed it head on either. And so for me, that was kind of the building. And then part of my journey is last year just hit a wall and started struggling with anxiety in a way that I had never experienced before. And I denied it for a long time. My wife, Megan, was in my ear, like, you need to connect with somebody. You got to fix this. It's affecting our family. And I didn't really own up to it until I started having really kind of debilitating panic attacks. And that was the first time I was like, okay, something has changed in me, and something's not right. And so I decided to take it head on, and we addressed it from up front at the church. And just like you said, it was amazing to see the response. We have never had a response like that to anything we've talked about at Mosaic, and people all over the spiritual spectrum. And it's just been amazing. And so I've started leaning into that and writing more and speaking more, and people are just coming out of the woodwork, because just like you said, there's so many people that struggle with this, but because they've never heard pastors or churches really talk about it, there's a lot of confusion as to how does this intersect with my faith? How do I understand this? I've
had a couple of panic attacks as an adult, and I didn't know what it was at the time, and I just knew it was really scary, and I knew I had to. In this case, it was through a camping experience, and I began to see some of the things kind of fuel my anxiety, and you just have this feeling of just wanting to crawl. For me, it was just wanting to crawl out of my skin. I got to move. I got to be somewhere. I can't just sit here. I've got to do something and just relocate. And so I actually incorporated that. We were preaching through something, I don't know, somehow related to anxiety or something in a text I was preaching. And I just kind of almost as a side note just said, I've suffered with anxiety, and just kind of opened that door, and didn't really say that much about it, except that I've experienced panic attacks, and I've suffered anxiety, and immediately it changed the tone in the congregation, where people kind of viewed that as a safe topic. Oh, really? Yeah. And then people start coming to you with their stories, don't they?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And for me, actually talking with other pastors in town, again, I've met several other pastors who have gone to the ER with panic attacks, thinking they were having a heart attack or something like that. And not only to be told, no, you're not having a heart attack, you're having a panic attack. Now, okay, at that moment, when you, as a pastor, okay, what spiritual gymnastics are going on inside of you when you realize that this is anxiety versus whatever you thought it was?
Yeah, I did think it was a heart attack.
Yeah.
I pulled the car over to the side of the road, and I thought, this is how I'm going out? Really? Driving my car down 48th Street.
Yep.
For me, it was a hard kind of kick in the pants, honestly. It was tough, because, we've taken and we teach on self-care, and so much of what we do is helping people take better care of themselves and talking about their inner world. And for my inner world to come like crashing out like that was a deeply humbling experience. And so for me, part of the journey too was like, what do I do with the personal embarrassment? Initially, I think, I don't know about you, but the feelings of shame, like it's very easy to get out the club and start shaming yourself. And I think, and honestly, I think that's something the enemy is particularly proficient in fueling.
Yep.
And when you're vulnerable and you're weak and you're crashing, man, your guard is down. And so that was a big part of my journey. And honestly, that's part of why I've just become so passionate about getting the issue out into the light, is when we don't talk about it and it remains in the dark, I think the personal shaming, and misunderstanding it, and it's relentless. It's never ending.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the unique things that we get to do, again, as pastors. Again, if you, for people who've known us long enough, again, we're not on a pedestal. They know us. They get us. Yeah. Those are the true friends that really fuel your own personal life. But for other folks who just kind of see us kind of as a position as opposed to as a person, they kind of have these impressions, again, that we don't have problems, that life just kind of works for us, and we're the answer guy, instead of being the guy who has a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And so when you begin to actually let people know, no, I've struggled with this. In fact, I'm still kind of sorting it through. I'm still figuring this out. I'm not, I don't know that I'm ever going to completely fix this in this life. It changes the conversation a lot.
It does.
So we're going to take a little break here, but what I do want to do is when we come back is to not only talk about the experience of it, but to begin to talk a little bit about what do we do to fix this? What are some of the things that you found that have been helpful? Because I think there's no two of us are the same, but there definitely are some themes in terms of things that are helpful, and maybe some things that Christians are reticent about.
Yeah.
And I'd love to explore that a little bit more. It's Saturday morning. You're listening to Stu Kerns, Aaron Loy here from Mosaic. We're going to talk about anxiety and depression a little bit today. If you do have a question or a comment, we welcome that. 402-479-1400. You're listening to Friendly Fire on 1400 KLIN.
Keeping the topics lively and keeping the conversation civil. This is Friendly Fire with Stu Kerns on the voice of Lincoln, 1400 KLIN.
Thanks to our favorite concerts being a U2 concert. We're getting U2 bumps here this morning. Thanks, Tommy. We are talking this morning with Aaron Loy from Mosaic here in town, and we're talking about anxiety and depression and just the role that's played in Aaron's life and ministry and my life. And if you do have a question, I know some of you, I've talked with a lot of folks who wrestle with anxiety and depression, and we're not clinicians, but we have some experiences that could be helpful. If you have a question or comment, 402-479-1400. Aaron, we were talking about the fact that, again, I think one thing I just can't say enough is that I think as Christians, Jesus said, be anxious for nothing, right? Paul says something very similar in Philippians. And so you've got these statements about anxiety, and I think so it makes us feel like when we're experiencing anxiety or depression, like we're failing, like somehow our Christianity is defective. How have you addressed that feeling?
Yeah, part of what's been really helpful for me is coming to terms with the fact that it's not just a spiritual issue. And I think sometimes in the Christian community, that's kind of our default. It's primary, what we talk a lot about. And sometimes, whether we mean to or not, what gets communicated is, this is a spiritual issue, so if your faith was spot on, if you had more faith, if you pray enough, claim enough, repent enough, whatever, that you won't be having this issue. But one of the things that was hugely helpful for me was coming to understand that this is so much more than, it's not just a spiritual issue. That there's also a very physical and even relational element going on, and so there's different ways to treat depression, and you do have the spiritual model that Christians kind of default to. And the truth is, often there is that spiritual component, but it's so much more complex than that. There's also the medical model that says, hey, there might be chemical imbalances here, so there's stuff going on with your body, and medicine can help. And also then there's the therapeutic model that says, hey, you've been through a lot, and you don't live in a silo. You are relationally connected, and you've had experience that have shaped you for better and for worse. And so those need to be worked through as well, and so I would just say, when it comes to depression, even as we talk about it and mental health in general, anxiety, I think it's important to just acknowledge that we can't treat it simplistically.
Yeah.
It's a very complex issue that affects people in entirely different ways at times, very unique ways.
Yeah.
And so there isn't a one-fit-all solution.
Well, and I wonder if that isn't why, again, that we don't have more success in kind of coping with depression and anxiety, because we just do have kind of a one-sided. And I think, too, I would put it the other way also. I think from a Christian standpoint, yes, we need the spiritual component, but we need that emotional and physical. We need all three.
Yes.
And I wonder if sometimes, again, the medical model is going to, hey, take a pill. This will fix things. And if you haven't processed things emotionally or spiritually, then I honestly don't think there's a pill that's going to help you.
Right.
And so we kind of, it seems like a really holistic approach is kind of the only thing that's going to really get the job done.
Yeah.
As you've been kind of, what happens, at least with me, and I imagine it happened with you as well, is you start experiencing something and you start self-educating. It's like when you started educating yourself and learning more, what did you find especially helpful?
Yeah, I did start doing reading and studying. There's one little book that I recommend a lot. It's a pretty easy read, but man, I found it really helpful and really balanced in its approach. It's called Christians Get Depressed Too. And I don't have the author's name in front of me here. But if you search on Amazon, it'll be the first thing that pops up. But that was really helpful. And even as I've continued to read and study it, I think it gives a pretty balanced way to process information. There's another book by the name called My Name is Hope, by a pastor out in Seattle, who I'm a pretty big fan of. I don't agree with where he lands medicinally. He's pretty anti-medication, and so I don't agree with that, but there is a lot of good things in that book as well.
Yeah. The one book that I'm always recommending to people, I always warn them it's a stupid title, but it's a really good book. It's a book by Archibald Hart called The Anxiety Cure. I don't know if you've ever bumped into that one.
No.
It's kind of the threefold model again, and he writes as a Christian and as a clinician. So the emotional piece, he's got in there. The spiritual piece, he addresses, I think, especially some of the guilt that Christians feel. But then also addresses there seems to be reticence, again, among Christians to acknowledge the medical component. And so he addresses that head on and some of the specific fears that Christians have about that. From your perspective, what's that about? Why? I mean, I already said I don't think a pill alone is going to fix everything, but there seems to still be some resistance there to the idea but there are medical things happening in your brain chemistry, and that actually a pill, if used properly, there's some medicines that are very helpful. Why are we? Do you find resistance to that?
I do.
What's that about?
I think probably the nicest way I can put it is we just don't understand. I think we don't treat the mind the way that we treat the rest of our body, and it's kind of a catch-22. It's kind of funny because, people who will be very anti-medication when it comes to treating mental health issues. They're pretty big fans of Novocaine when they're in the dentist chair, and the truth is, the brain is different in the sense that, you can't just put it up on an X-ray and say, here's the problem, and I think that's the catchy part. And even I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, it's a lot easier to say my tooth aches than my heart hurts. And it's easier to diagnose that tooth as well. And so I think that's the biggest part of it is the brain is complex, and there's a lot about the brain that we don't know, and we tend to treat the brain differently than the rest of our body.
Yeah, and I react to this because I've told some people, I said, I think 100 years from now, or 200 years from now, whenever, that they're going to look at our understanding of the brain and our attempts to, again, use medicines properly to help brain chemistry. I think they're going to refer to this as the Dark Ages. that we've got some general ideas and some things certainly help, but I just think 100, 200 years from now they're going to know so much more, and that we're going to have so much more effective treatment. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, it really does. I think you hit it spot on. Is the science, especially around the brain. We know so much more today than we did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at how rapid and fast that progress is, and you almost have to conclude that we are just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
And so I think when we talk about mental health, and maybe this is part of the reason that people are so tentative in really green lighting medicine. And as somebody who has taken medicine and it's helped me immensely, it's also certainly not the cure-all.
Yeah.
You rarely get it right the first time. There's can often be nasty side effects, which I've experienced. And I would just say, because of that, I think as we talk about mental health, we need to approach this particular topic with an extra measure of grace. And acknowledging that there's a lot that we don't know, and 10, 20 years from now, we're going to know a lot more.
Yeah, and I think that's exciting. I mean, it's just very exciting to think about the future, the different mental health issue. But for some reason, we've had several people at Zion who've struggled with schizophrenia, and one case in particular was a guy that I knew before he was afflicted. Then after he was afflicted, tremendously high IQ, very bright guy, and it's such a debilitating, illness. Again, he's functioning. He's a very sweet guy, and yet you see, we see what he was and what the disease has, how it's harmed him, and I've seen this a few times, and it's gut wrenching. It's just heartbreaking, and to think that that at some point down the line, let's get this figured out so that folks who suffer this way, that we can give them back their life. But of course, as pastors, it may not be mental illness, but we're dealing with people who are suffering all the time.
Yes.
And as whatever the issue is, as people are coming to you and they're suffering, this is one question sometimes I'll ask different pastors. We walk into that cloud of trouble a lot. As you walk into that room and somebody is just deeply troubled, whatever it is, could be a death, could be depression, could be a lot of different things. What are some of the things you just keep in the front of your mind as a pastor?
The biggest thing is that for me in those moments, I tend to want to, it's like I need to have the answer. Like I need to have the answer they're looking for right now.
Yeah.
But when people are really in the thick of it, sometimes they don't need that answer right now. I think the gift of presence, the ministry of being fully present with somebody in their suffering is often enough and profoundly powerful. And if a conversation needs to be had and there are questions, we're there. But I usually try to wait for them to ask and to do my best to point them to Jesus, and to be his presence physically in the room to the best of my ability.
Yeah, that's not much more we can do than that. We're having a great conversation this morning here with Aaron Loy from Mosaic. And right around the corner, we're going to come back. We'll do a few shameless plugs, and we'll wrap up the program. It's been a great conversation talking about mental illness, anxiety, depression. I know there are folks out there who have suffered, and we want you to hear a voice of hope today. This is 1400 KLIN.
Breaking down the week's news in the light of faith. This is Friendly Fire with Stu Kerns on the Voice of Lincoln, 1400 KLIN.
On a Saturday morning, Stu Kerns here on Friendly Fire with Aaron Loy from Mosaic. And we have been talking about anxiety and depression and our own personal experiences a little bit, and then also how to deal with it. But we do have to pause for the shameless plugs section of the program here. And so, Aaron, what you got to plug?
Yeah. Biggest one I would say, everybody's got Easter coming up.
Yep.
And so we're excited. Part of the fun part about being a mobile church is we don't really get locked into a particular space, so we get to experiment and try new things. And so we're headed back to the Rococo this year which none of Mosaic knows until now. Surprise, guys, we're going to the Rococo. But we love that space down there. We've done Christmas Eve down there as well, and Easter in the past. And so so it's going to be just one big church-wide celebration at 10 a.m. on Easter.
That's great. That's great. A couple of years ago, we started the Three Sister Churches of Zion, started doing a one joint service in the summer, and the first one we did was out at Pinewood Bowl. And they had just had a concert the other night, and so they had this big Bud Light banner on the side there during, right for the worship service. It was awesome. But it was a fun thing out there. I will plug something different. This weekend, actually, Aaron and I are headed out to Schuyler for a thing called the Summit, and it's just a prayer retreat. And so it's pastors and Christian leaders coming together just to pray for this city. And so if you have some prayer requests or something, put them on my Facebook page. I'll take them out with me. And we're just going to go, and there's a personal retreat. We kind of get acquainted with one another and build some relationships, and then we pray for the city. And so that's going to be a neat opportunity this Sunday, Monday, at the St. Benedict Center out in Schuyler. And if you want to pray for us as we are praying and retreating, that would be awesome. That'll be a great opportunity. As we wrap up the program today, then, thinking about anxiety and depression, we haven't really talked much about depression. Anxiety and depression, I've kind of said they're kind of like cousins. They're kind of related. How do you see the relationship between the two?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. In the medical community, more and more, they're using them in the same sentence, and they're saying depression and anxiety, as if they're kind of two sides of the same coin. And so even as I've written about depression and anxiety, or what we did a teaching series last year, we really addressed them together, even acknowledging that they often go hand in hand. And, you can treat them together in mental health, because mental health and depression and anxiety, they affect people so uniquely. But it was hugely helpful. We had a number of people in our community and outside who it was like a light bulb moment for them to realize, because they had been reading about depression, and it's like, it's so close, it's like I'm almost there, but a lot of this doesn't apply to me. But the moment that you tack on depression and anxiety, it was like the light bulb came on. They said, oh, okay, so this is my struggle. It doesn't affect me this way, but on the anxiety side, this is something I've struggled with for a long time. So it's a really helpful thing for them to understand that those two often go hand in hand.
Is it fair to say that, because I haven't studied depression as much as anxiety, but would it be fair to say that depression seems to be more like of an ongoing, always in the background or foreground, whatever, but kind of a long term, and anxiety, while it is ongoing, it feels a bit more episodic, like all of a sudden I had an attack or something, whereas you don't have a depression attack, you sink into a depression and have a hard time crawling out of it. How would you describe it?
Sure. Yeah. It depends again. Okay. It really depends on the individual. And, for some people it is episodic, it's seasonal, experiential, and that can be, that's part of the struggle, really, honestly, for those like myself who have struggled with depression, is sometimes in the seasonal things or the experiential depression, episodic, you can point your finger to, oh, this is why I'm feeling the way that I am. Yeah. But depression can often hit in the same way that anxiety can. Okay. And
it can hit kind of hard.
It really can, and out of nowhere. And sometimes I've heard it described as it's kind of like a bruise in your mind. Okay. As one author put it, and I like that kind of imagery, because like a bruise, sometimes you know where it came from. Yep. You hit your knee or whatever, but sometimes you just have a bruise. It's like, what in the world? Where did that come from? And depression can be the same way.
Yeah. One of the things I've found with a lot of people is that whenever we're suffering something, we aren't always very curious, and just kind of, again, I talk about doing an autopsy. You have an experience, let's do an autopsy. Let's figure out what happened here. And just old-fashioned curiosity. I'll talk with people, and they say, well, I'm struggling. It's like, well, tell me about your life. Well, I just changed jobs, and I moved to a new city, and I just got married, and we got a new puppy, and it's like, well, dude, no kidding. It's like, this is not a mystery. It's like, you just did like 5 hard things at once. Like, no kidding. It's like, do you find that people don't connect those dots?
Sometimes, yeah. And some of it is, especially in the mental health kind of thing, if they're clinical, sometimes it's not quite as clear to them as it is to us.
Yep.
Even when you're clinical, there's seasons when it's worse than others, or you experience things like stress points like that just will plunge you. Anxiety, that's huge. It'll really mess with your anxiety. So, it's helpful to be on the outside looking in, because we can see things just as you can see things in my life that when I'm in the thick of it, I just don't see some of those things.
Yeah.
I have blind spots.
Yeah. Well, and again, I don't want to. I'm sorry, I run the risk there of kind of oversimplifying, because it isn't simple.
Right.
But there are sometimes, just as we again pastorally counsel with folks, that I think it's weird. We live in a culture that's so introspective, and yet to also just be honest about the fact that, well, no, I am struggling with this, and I don't like this, and this part of my life really sucks right now, because maybe it traces back to that idea that, I'm a Christian, and so I'm supposed to be, and so we project what we think we're supposed to be, as opposed to what really is going on.
Right. Yes.
That's a tough nut to crack.
It is, and I think that's part of the value of the conversation, is giving people permission to own it and say, like, I am struggling, and it's okay to seek help, and some of that help might have to come from somebody other than my pastor. And that's one of the things that I've had to do too, is just sometimes I just have to tell people I'm not equipped or qualified to help you with some of the things that you need to work through. And that's okay. It's okay to meet with a counselor. And so again, I just want to reiterate, sometimes we want to go black and white in the Christian community and take almost like a fundamentalist approach to issues like this, like of mental health. But the thing is, when it comes to mental health, the Bible does address the topic prescriptively, right? We see pictures of depression and anxiety and it affecting, at times, great men and women of faith. But the Bible doesn't approach it prescriptively. And so, again, we've got to approach the issue with an extra measure of grace towards one another.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've been listening to Friendly Fire this morning, and it's been great to have Aaron Loy from Mosaic here. And catch us up on Facebook if you have a further question or a comment. We'd love to connect with you. But have a great day. It's going to be awesome out there. And as we talk about all this stuff and you go into the week, we want to tell you to think about it.
Talk about it.
We'll see you next week.